flight landed 40 minutes early. I remember thinking that was a good sign. I'd been in Dallas for 4 days, a training conference for regional managers, the kind way you sit through 8 hours of PowerPoint slides and pretend the hotel coffee is acceptable. I was exhausted in that specific way where your body is tired but your brain won't slow down, and all I wanted was to get home, take a shower, and sleep in my own bed. My daughter was 7. Her name is Piper. She has her dad's dark hair and my stubborn streak. And when I left on Monday morning, she had wrapped both arms around my leg and said, "Mommy, don't go." I'd peeled her off gently, kissed her forehead, and promised I'd be back by Friday evening. It was Thursday night, 9:48 p.m., when the Uber pulled into our neighborhood. I almost texted ahead. I almost said, "Hey, I'm almost home, early surprise." I didn't because I thought it would be fun to walk in and see Piper's face light up. She'd probably already be asleep, but I wanted to peek in at her, watch her breathe for a second, the way you do when you've been away from your kid. Just to confirm they're real and okay and yours. The house lights were on. That was the first thing I noticed. The living room, the kitchen. Everything bright at 10 p.m. on a Thursday, when a 7-year-old should have been in bed 2 hours ago. I paid the driver, grabbed my roller bag, and used my key. The smell hit me before anything else. Garlic bread. Someone had made a real dinner. I could hear laughter from the kitchen, not just my husband, not just the TV, actual people, multiple voices, kids. I set my bag down in the entryway and walked toward the sound. My husband was sitting at the head of the dining table. Across from him was my younger sister, Becca. She'd moved in 6 weeks earlier, just until I get back on my feet, she'd said after her breakup with her boyfriend of 3 years. I'd said yes because she's my sister and I love her, and that's what you do. Next to her were her 2 boys, Tyler, who's 9, and Caden, who's 6. They were eating pasta, garlic bread. There was a bottle of wine on the table, half empty. My husband had a glass in his hand, and he was laughing at something one of the boys had said. It took me a moment to realize Piper wasn't at the table. I said, "Hey." Everyone looked up. My husband's expression did something complicated. Surprise first, then something that tried to become warmth but didn't quite get there. Becca smiled like everything was completely normal. "You're home early," she said. "Where's Piper?" I asked. There was a half-second pause. Barely anything. But I caught it. My husband said, "She's in the garage." I didn't respond. I walked back through the kitchen, through the laundry room, and pushed open the door to the garage. The overhead light was off. The garage was lit by the single strip of light coming under the door from the laundry room, which meant my eyes took a moment to adjust. There was my car, my husband's old workbench, boxes we hadn't unpacked since we moved in 2 years ago. And there was Piper. She was sitting on the cold concrete floor between the front tire and the wall, wrapped in a fleece blanket that she must have dragged out herself. She had her stuffed rabbit in her lap, the one she's had since she was 18 months old, the one she's had since she was 18 months old, the one she calls Bun, and she was asleep. Her head was dropped to one side, her cheek resting against the wall. I stood there for a moment and I couldn't breathe. I picked her up as carefully as I could. She stirred, made a small sound, and then her eyes opened and she looked at me and said, "Mummy?" "I'm here," I said. "I was waiting for you," she said. I carried her inside. I walked past the dining room without looking at any of them. I took Piper upstairs, changed her into pajamas, got her into bed. She asked if I'd stay until she fell asleep, and I said yes. I sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for a long time after her breathing evened out. Then I went back downstairs. My sister was cleaning up the kitchen. My husband was at the sink. The boys had apparently gone to bed in the guest room, the room we'd set up for Becca as a temporary arrangement 6 weeks ago, which had slowly expanded to include a second dresser, a TV, a mini-fridges. I stood in the doorway and I said, very quietly, "Why was my daughter in the garage?" My husband turned around. He had a dish towel in his hand. He said, "She was acting up." She wouldn't stop interrupting dinner. I said, "She's 7, he said. "I know how old she is." "The garage is not heated," I said. "It's 42 degrees outside." He said, "She had a blanket." My sister had stopped moving. She was standing at the counter with her back to me, very still. I said, "Becca." She turned around. She had an expression I'd seen on her face before. That particular arrangement of features she uses when she thinks she's not doing anything wrong. A kind of careful neutrality. I said, "Did you know she was out there?" She said, "I thought it was just for a few minutes." She was asleep on the concrete floor, I said. "Kids are resilient," she said. "I want you to understand something about that moment. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even the kind of hurt that makes you cry. It was something colder than that, and cleaner. It was the moment you understand that something is true that you had been refusing to acknowledge, like finally looking at something directly instead of out of the corner of your eye." I said, "You need to start looking for somewhere else to stay." Becca started to say something. I think she said my name, and I walked out of the kitchen. That night my husband came to bed around midnight. I was awake. I didn't pretend to be asleep. He said, "You're overreacting." I said, "My daughter was sitting on a cold concrete floor in the dark while you ate dinner and drank wine." He said, "She'd been misbehaving all evening. I needed her out of the room." "For how long?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, and that pause told me everything. I said, "How long was she out there?" He said, "I don't know, maybe an hour and a half." An hour and a half? While they ate dinner? While they drank wine? While they laughed? I got up, got my pillow, and went to sleep in Piper's room on the floor next to her bed. In the morning, I called my friend Jess, who has been my best friend since college, and who is also, fortunately, a paralegal at a family law firm. I didn't tell her everything yet. I just told her enough. She told me to document everything and to not make any financial moves without talking to her first. That's when I started looking at our bank accounts. We have a joint checking account and a joint savings account. The savings account was where I put money every month, a specific transfer, always the same amount, toward Piper's college fund. We'd been building it for 4 years. The balance should have been somewhere around $38,000. It was $4,211. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and I went through 4 years of statements. The withdrawals had started small, $300 here, $500 there. Then they got bigger. They were always made on days when I was traveling for work. Over the course of 14 months, my husband had withdrawn $34,000 from Piper's college fund. I went through his personal statements too. I had his login information because I'd set up his accounts when we switched banks 2 years ago, and he'd never changed the password. I found transfers, consistent, sizable transfers to an account I didn't recognize. I wrote down the account number. I wrote down every date and every amount. Then I called Jess back and told her everything. She said, "Don't touch anything. Don't confront him yet. Can you come in today?" The attorney Jess connected me with was a woman named Patricia Howard, not my Becca, not anyone I knew personally. She had short gray hair and an unhurried way of speaking that made me feel like whatever I said wasn't going to surprise her. I showed her the bank statements. I showed her the transfers. I showed her the photos I'd taken of the garage, the blanket on the floor, the position of where Piper had been sitting, the frost on the exterior door of the garage that night. She looked at everything carefully, and then she said, "How long has your sister been living with you?" I said 6 weeks. She said, "And whose name is on the mortgage?" "Mine." The house was mine before we got married. I'd bought it 2 years before I met my husband. We'd never refinanced it into both names, because we'd talked about eventually selling and buying something together. We hadn't gotten around to it. She said, "That simplifies one part of this considerably." She told me what I needed to do. She told me what I should not do. She was very clear. Do not confront your husband directly about the money. Do not tell your sister she needs to leave again until we have certain things in place. Do not make any financial moves until we establish exactly where those transfers went. I said, I already told her she needed to find somewhere to stay. She said, "Don't follow up on that for now. We need everything to look normal while we gather information." I went home and I made dinner and I sat across the table from my husband and I ate. It took 11 days. During those 11 days, I watched things I hadn't let myself see before. The way my husband topped off my sister's wine glass without being asked. The way he laughed differently with her, lighter, easier than he ever laughed with me anymore. The way Tyler and Caden had toys in the living room, nice ones, new ones, and when I looked at the Amazon order history under my husband's account, I found 6 purchases in the past 2 months. Books, a remote control car, a building set, a children's tablet. None of them for Piper. I found something else in the order history too, a booking confirmation. A hotel in Scottsdale, 4 nights, February. When I had been at a conference in Phoenix and thought I was traveling alone, the hotel booking was under my husband's name, but the room had been for 2 guests. I took a screenshot. I forwarded it to my email. I forwarded it to my attorney. On the 12th day, Jess called me and told me that the unknown account the transfers had been going into was a joint account in my husband's name and my sister's name. They'd opened it 9 months ago. 9 months. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the grocery store, and I did not cry. I had thought I would cry when I finally confirmed it, but instead I just felt very calm, like the thing you've been dreading had finally arrived, and now that it was here, it was somehow more manageable than the fear of it had been. My attorney filed the paperwork that week. She also sent a letter to my husband and, separately, to my sister, via certified mail. The letter to my sister informed her that she was required to vacate the property within 30 days under the terms of a formal notice to quit. My husband came home that evening with the letter in his hand. He said, "What is this?" I said, "A legal notice." He said, "You're divorcing me." I said, "I'm also pursuing a civil action for the money." He stared at me. And then he said something I hadn't expected. He said, "I can explain the money." I said, "I know what the account is. I know whose name is on it. I know the hotel in Scottsdale." He sat down on the couch. He looked, suddenly, like a much older version of himself, like the air had gone out of him all at once. He said, "I never meant for it to go this far." I said, $34,000 and a hotel room for 2 didn't happen by accident. He said he'd been unhappy. He said things between us had gotten distant after Piper was born. He said my sister had been easy to talk to, and then it became something more, and he hadn't known how to stop it. He said the money had started as just helping her out because she was struggling, and then it had become something they were building together without him fully realizing. I let him talk. I had been advised by my attorney that if he chose to speak voluntarily, I should listen. I did not record him. I want to be clear about that. I simply listened. When he finished, I said, "I need you to leave tonight." He said, "This is my home." I said, "It is not. It is not. It has never been. The deed is in my name. You have no legal claim to this property." My attorney has confirmed this. He left. He called twice that night, and once the next morning. I didn't answer. I sent everything to my attorney. My sister was harder. She knocked on the door 2 days later. I could see her through the window. She'd left to stay with a friend when she got the notice, taking the boys with her. But now she was back. Standing on my porch, I opened the door. She said, "I just want to talk." I said, "My attorney has advised me not to discuss anything directly." She said, "He pursued me. I want you to know that." I said, "It doesn't matter to me who pursued who." She said, "You're my sister." I said, "I know." I closed the door. The civil case took longer than anything else. My attorney connected me with a forensic accountant who traced every transfer, where it went, what it was used for. The joint account had been used for rent on an apartment they'd apparently planned to move into together. It had also been used for groceries for the boys' expenses for a weekend in New Orleans in October, when I thought my husband was at a bachelor party. The totals, including interest and associated costs, came to just under $41,000. The divorce was finalized 6 months after I filed. My husband agreed to the settlement without going to court, which my attorney said was likely because a contested divorce would have required him to explain the transfers under oath, and that was a conversation he wasn't willing to have publicly. He paid back $38,000. The remaining $3,000 became part of the formal settlement terms. The state could pursue its own case regarding the misappropriation of joint marital funds. That was something my attorney flagged to the appropriate people. I didn't have control over what happened after that. I understood it was possible that charges could follow, possible that nothing would. I accepted that some things would be outside my hands. My sister and I have not spoken since she stood on my porch. I don't think we will for a long time. Maybe ever. I thought about that more than I expected to. Not with anger, exactly, but with a kind of grief that doesn't have a clean name. She is still my sister. She will always be my sister. That doesn't change what she did. Piper turned 8 in September. I threw her a party in the backyard, 12 kids, a face painter, more sugar than any parent should allow. She wore a yellow dress and spent most of the afternoon running in circles with her best friend from school. At one point she ran up to me out of nowhere and hugged me around the waist and said, "I love you, Mommy," before running off again. I am still in the house. I repainted the entryway a color called Sage Whisper that I'd been looking at for 2 years. I bought a new couch. The garage has a space heater now, and storage shelves, and Piper's bike hangs on the wall on a proper rack. I went back to work full-time. I'd reduced my hours when we'd first gotten married because he'd suggested it, had framed it as better for the family. It was better for him. I know that now. I've been promoted since. My direct reports are all women, which I didn't plan, but I'm proud of. I don't have a tidy conclusion for you. I don't have a lesson that wraps everything up. What I have is this. I went to Dallas for 4 days, and I came home to a version of my life I hadn't known I was living. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I'm grateful for that, even though it didn't feel like gratitude at the time. Piper asked me once, a few months after everything, if she was going to have to sleep in the garage again. I told her no. I told her she would never sleep in the garage again. She said, "Good. It was cold." I said, "I know, baby. I know." She thought about it for a moment, the way 7-year-olds do, with their whole face. Then she said, "Can we get a dog?" And I said yes. I've thought a lot about the sequence of events that led to that Thursday night. Not to punish myself, but because I think it matters to understand how things actually unfold. Slowly, quietly, in ways you keep explaining away because the alternative explanation is too uncomfortable to sit with. I let my sister move in because I loved her. That was real. It came from a good place. But I also didn't ask enough questions. I didn't notice the small things accumulating, the way dinner was always ready when I got home from a trip, the way my husband seemed lighter on weeks when Becca was around, the way Piper had started going quiet in ways she hadn't before. I told myself kids go through phases. I told myself I was tired and probably reading too much into things. I told myself a lot of things that turned out not to be true. What I've come to understand is that ignoring something doesn't make it smaller. It makes it larger because now it's growing in the dark where you can't see it. The $34,000 didn't disappear overnight. It disappeared across 14 months, in amounts small enough that I could have caught it at any point if I'd been paying attention. That's not a comfortable thing to acknowledge about yourself. That you looked away, that some part of you chose not to look. But I think it's important to be honest about it because the honest version is the one you can actually learn from. What changed everything wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was a 7-year-old asleep on concrete, holding a stuffed rabbit in the dark. That's what made everything finally clear. Sometimes the thing that wakes you up isn't the thing you expected. It's something simple and completely undeniable. After that, I didn't act out of anger. I want to be clear about that. Anger would have had me screaming in the kitchen that night, which would have felt satisfying for about 4 minutes, and then given them something to work with. Instead, I got quiet. I called Jess. I found an attorney. I gathered information before I moved. That restraint was the hardest thing I've ever done. Sitting across a dinner table from 2 people who had taken from me and my daughter, and pretending I didn't know yet. But it was the right thing. Every careful, documented, deliberate step I took in those 11 days protected Piper and protected me in ways that an emotional blow-up never could have. That's the part nobody tells you about getting through something like this. It's not about being fearless. I was terrified. I was devastated. I cried in parking lots and in the shower, and once, quietly, in a bathroom stall at work. But I kept making the next right decision anyway. That's all resilience actually is. Not the absence of falling apart, but the ability to fall apart and still make the next call, sign the next document, show up for your kid the next morning. Becca and I have not spoken. My husband is gone. The house is mine. It was always mine, and now it finally feels like it. Piper got her dog, a beagle mix named Waffles, who sleeps at the foot of her bed and chews through socks at an alarming rate. She is doing fine. Better than fine. Kids, it turns out, are remarkably good at moving forward when you give them a stable place to stand. I'm still working on that myself, but I'm working on it.